thing that came across to us in the early days was just how broken the culture at the post office was. Its marketing slogan at the time this was going on was Britain's most trusted brand. It became apparent that the institution thoroughly distrusted those sub-postmasters. And they went, see, we knew it all along. They've been fiddling the books all along, and now we can prove it.
I once listened to an interview with best-selling author and renowned marketeer Seth Godin. Whilst discussing podcasting, he remarked, if you were not going to do 100 episodes, then don't bother doing one. By that point, I'd already done one, so I felt obliged to do another 99. And I'm glad that I did, because fast forward to today, and I feel blessed and lucky to have interviewed some of the most inspiring people I'm ever likely to meet, who, hopefully, have also inspired some others along the way. In any case, here we are, episode 100 of the Tech Leaders podcast. And today I'm honoured to have with us the brilliant Bryan Glick, editor-in-chief of renowned IT industry publication, Computer Weekly. Bryan has been a leading figure in tech journalism for over 20 years, bringing to light some of the most recognised and important stories from the technology sector in the UK and beyond since the mid-80s. One such standout story is the post office scandal. Computer Weekly were the first media outlet to break this story back in 2009. Bryan and his team, over the course of 15 years and 400 articles, through their investigative journalism and sheer determination, helped reveal the systematic issues within the post office and also shined a light on the plight of the wrongfully accused sub-postmasters. In today's episode, we delve into the details of how the post office story broke, the shocking wow moments of the scandal, Fujitsu's role in the whole affair, and much, much more. Bryan also shares insights into the importance of investigative journalism. We also explore his career journey and his formative years and milestones. And also, we talk about the ever-changing trends in the tech sector, and also his forecast for AI adoption, the future of the workplace, and much, much more. We couldn't have picked a better episode for our 100th. This has been one of the most enjoyable and profoundly moving conversations I've been involved in. Please welcome the editor-in-chief of Computer Weekly, Bryan Glick. So Bryan Glick, thank you so much for agreeing to come on to the podcast. It's a special episode for us. It's the 100th episode, and we wanted to get a big guest on. And who better than your good self, the editor at Computer Weekly, one of the most very well-known IT publications, certainly from the early days, and continues to be an authority on everything technology and IT, certainly in the UK. Really proud to have you on, Bryan. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting. It's great to have an opportunity to come on and talk about a little bit about what we do, and to talk to an audience that I know from all your previous podcasts is really interested in everything that's going on in the technology world and how it's affecting our lives.
And there's so much going on right now and so many things for us to talk about. But let's start with what we always ask to kick things off, Bryan. What does good leadership mean to you?
Good leadership. That's a great question. I think good leadership for me is about creating an environment in which the people that you're leading can be as successful as they can be. There are two aspects to it. There's what you might call managing upwards, and I think a big part of I certainly see a big part of my job as an editorial leader is communicating with my bosses, especially people in the sort of commercial side of our business, to make sure that I can understand what they need, what our business strategy needs is, but also managing their expectations and making sure that they are aware of what we're doing and the role that we're playing as part of that business strategy. And then, of course, the most important on a day-to-day basis is managing and engaging with the team. For me, it's about making sure that they all understand their individual role in that business strategy.
Absolutely.
How they contribute to that strategy and to the editorial strategy. It's about making sure that they've got tools that they need to be able to do their job. It's about creating a collaborative and supportive culture among the team where people feel that they are supported and they've got people they can go to for help if they need to. It doesn't have to be me.
Yeah.
It can be their colleagues in the team. And then giving them the autonomy to make their own decisions. And then if you can put all that in place as a leader, I think really then you just need to stand back and get out of the way and let them do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good answer. I mean, look, I think one thing that stood out with that is just making sure people in your team are very, very clear on what their role is and what they're there to do. It sounds so simple, but I mean, if you just get that bit right, then a lot of the everything it corrects a lot of things, doesn't it? But it is something that so many get wrong.
Recruiting the right people, bringing in the right people into that team is a hugely important part of that.
Yeah, for sure.
When I'm recruiting journalists into the team, I'm confident because we've done it many times. If we're bringing in junior people, for example, I know we can train them how to be a really good journalist. I know that we can give them the experience and the skills to be a really good journalist. I know that if they don't know much about tech, that we can explain to them what they need to know about tech and how the tech world works.
So I noticed, just to maybe give the listeners a little bit of a background on yourself, Bryan, I noticed you graduated from Southampton University with a computer studies degree in 1987.
Yeah.
I think it was probably the same year I had a Atari 2600 for Christmas, and which set me off on my journey. But obviously, you did a degree in computer studies. Can you give the listeners a bit of an overview and an introduction to yourself and an overview of your career and how you followed the vocational direction that you ultimately ended up pursuing?
Yeah, 1987 is. I hate how long ago that feels these days. I can't. I've gone past the point where I can persuade people. Yeah, I was only like 5 years old when I graduated from university. I ended up doing a computer studies degree, as you say, at Southampton, almost accidentally. I wanted to go to university. That was my main decision. At A level, I'd done sort of maths and science. Computer science degree was part of the maths department, so they all had like a common first year, if you like. And I started off doing maths, and I vividly remember sitting in the back of a lecture theatre, and there was a lecturer up the front who was doing a proof of why 1 is greater than 0. And I can remember thinking to myself, do you know what? There are some things in life I'm just happy to accept. I don't need to prove that 1 is greater than 0. I'm quite happy to accept that is the case. And I sort of realised at that point there is no way I'm going to survive doing maths for 3 years at university. I swapped over to the computer studies degree because I had some good friends who were doing that, and I just feel like something was more practical and more real life, if you like, more engaged with real life. Not that maths isn't real life, and that was a great decision for me, and I thoroughly enjoyed studying it. When I then started looking for a job, what I was focusing on then was trying to get transferable skills. I always had this idea, despite having ended up doing a computer science degree, that I wasn't going to stay in tech forever. I go off and work in a in inverted commas more interesting area than that. So I joined an IT company. I joined an IT company called ICL, which later became Fujitsu, and trained as a sales rep. And I spent sort of 10 years at ICL selling big IT solutions, selling old big mainframes and Unix servers and all this sort of thing for ICL. And in my mind, this was always, I was gathering the transferable sales skills so that I could go off and sell something else. Of course, that never quite happened that way. Well, I left ICL. I worked for 2 or 3 sort of smaller companies doing sales. The longer I was going on doing sales, the less I was enjoying it. It wasn't really me. I'm not, I know now I'd say I'm not really the right personality type. And I went into a job that was quite a relatively senior sales role, but it was, I won't name the company, but it was the most politically toxic environment I've ever worked in my life. It was really horrible. And, with hindsight, I can say, fortunately, I got made redundant from there after a few months. I was on quite a good contract, so I got quite a decent payoff to leave. And I basically said to myself, right, I'm just going to take a year out. I've got enough money from the payoff. I can afford not to work for a year. So I'm just going to try other things. I'm going to, if I end up going back into selling tech, then I'll do it. But at that point in my life, I really felt I wasn't happy with it. I was pretty miserable, and I felt I wanted to try something else.
Yeah.
And so part of, I tried all sorts of things during that year, one of which was a bit of journalism. I was fortunate that one of my sisters, she was a music journalist in the 1980s. And so through some contacts of hers, I got to do a little bit of work experience at a national newspaper for a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Made some good contacts there and basically said to them, look, I'm not doing anything. I don't need you to pay me money. If there's any writing journalism that comes up that nobody else wants to do, it's the really rubbish jobs that nobody wants to do at short notice, get in touch with me. I'll do it for you if you want. You don't have to pay me for it. I just want to get the opportunity to learn. And that arrangement worked quite well. I sort of did that for a few months and wrote all sorts of weird and wonderful articles. I interviewed a man who made art out of vegetables. I interviewed the pet slimmer of the year.
It's a great foundation, though, isn't it? Creating stories out of lame things, I mean, it's...
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, in that respect, it's come in very handy at times over the years, yeah.
You learn how to sensationalise, you learn how to make things sound interesting, I suppose, yeah?
Yeah, I guess that's right, yeah. But that was great fun. And then just one day I saw an advert in The Guardian, in the days when The Guardian was the place where all journalist jobs were advertised. I saw a job for like an entry-level job for a reporter on another tech magazine called Computing, which I remembered reading when I still around. It's still around as a website today. This advert specifically said, would suit somebody who's had some experience of working in tech, looking to make a career change. And I thought, well, that's me. And obviously, what they were looking for was somebody who was 22 years old, fresh out of university or something, rather than somebody who was had just turned 30. But I went along. They gave me an interview. I went along. I just hit it off with the guy who would become my boss straight away, and we both sort of said, "Look, let's just give it a go." It was an enormous drop in pay for me compared to what I was earning as a sales rep in tech, and we sort of said, "Let's just give it a go." And I said to him, "If I'm no good, just tell me." And I said, if it turns out that I can't afford to do the job, then I'll tell you, and we'll shake hands and walk away. And from the very first day, I absolutely loved it. So I was very lucky. I'm fortunate. I can say I found my vocation. A lot of the skills that I developed as a sales rep turned out to be very relevant to journalism as well. Picking up the phone and trying to persuade people to talk to me, to let me meet them, to ask them questions and get information out of them. Yeah, building up that sort of trust and long-term relationships with people. There was a lot of overlap in terms of skills. The outcome at the end might be very different, but a lot of the skills were very, very comparable.
It's funny, Bryan, isn't it? Like earlier in your career, I'm sure everyone can relate to this, certainly if they're in the later stages in their career, but there's lessons you learn early in your life or early in your career. At the time, you don't know they are lessons. They just feel like heartache or, sort of like quite frustrating experiences of some sort. But then years later, you look back and you think, bloody hell, I'm glad I went through that because it equipped me so much better for what I'm doing. You know what I mean? It's like, it's retrospectively, totally. In hindsight's a wonderful thing they say. I mean, it is, I think that relates a lot, and I'm sure it will relate to a lot of people, actually. So you set on this path. Journalism felt right for you. You clearly had a good gut feeling on it.
So, I sort of, started as literally as a sort of entry-level reporter at Computing. I found my skills were relevant for it. I had a big advantage that, having done a degree in it and worked in the tech sector for over 10 years, I knew how tech worked. I understood the tech sector. I had contacts within it.
Sure.
So I was able to focus on learning to be a good journalist rather than having to learn to understand the tech sector. And, my career developed well there, thrived. I was finding good stories. I was getting on the front page. This was back in the print days, print magazine days. I was getting stories on the front page, and I got very fortunate. I got promoted, and eventually a few years later, I eventually got to be editor of Computing in the sort of mid to late 2000s.
I'm really keen to ask you about that. The first 2 or 3 years, if we could just zoom in on that period of the tech industry in the UK. I think obviously we were seeing the emergence of the behemoth Silicon Valley companies around that time, weren't we? Can you just maybe give us your recollection of that period? It was an exciting time. The dot-com boom had happened. We were it was kind of like the re-emergence of the big Goliaths of the internet age. And the internet it's probably the 2.0 golden age, really, isn't it, around that time? So can you tell us about What was on trend? What was exciting you? And what stood out for you from that period between 2009 and when you became editor?
That time around, 2000, early 2000s. The irony is, I probably wouldn't have even had an opportunity to get that initial job at computing were it not for the fact that that sort of dot-com boom was going on at the time. There were loads of new sort of dot-com tech websites were springing up, venture capital funded websites, and they were poaching a lot of experienced tech journalists, offering them a lot more money to leave these ailing print publications, these old school 20th century print publications, and go into this great new dot-com world. And computing at the time was really struggling to recruit people because, people thought, oh no, you're going to be dead in a couple of years, and people felt they could earn a lot more money in the dot-com world. So in all honesty, they were probably a little desperate, and that was why I got an opportunity to get a job there.
Yeah.
The irony was, of course, a lot of those, not all, but a lot of those dot-com tech sites that sprung up at that time didn't last very long. So a lot of those people who left didn't necessarily have such a great outcome in the end. What was exciting about it and being at the part of it for me was how it was not just the technology itself, but how it was changing business.
Yeah,
I was writing every week about talking to companies about how technology was changing their business, how it was changing their industry. This, the early days of the digital revolution, the sort of digital transformation of whole industries.
Yeah, because we were recovering from a recession around that time, weren't we?
That's right.
And tech was basically helping accelerate that recovery, I think. And it was the smartphone, I think, was coming to prominence around that time, wasn't it? I mean, it was when the iPhone really took off in that period. The 4G rollout. Yeah, e-commerce, it was a really exciting time.
I mean, early 2000s really was the growth of e-commerce, eBay, Amazon, things like that. In those days we were still generally, the mobile phone industry in those days was still, how small can you get it? It was, not Nokia phones, and how small can you get, and how tiny can you make the keyboard on a Nokia phone and still make it usable. Now that obviously changed come sort of 2007, 2008, when the smartphone revolution started, and when Apple launched the iPhone, which obviously was the real catalyst there. But I was learning both about how technology was changing industries and organizations, but obviously the media industry itself arguably was going through one of the biggest digital transformations of all, with change in advertising, the move from print to online, the change in advertising sources, the rise of Google, and the amount of advertising revenue that Google took out of traditional media. So I learned a huge amount during that period at computing, from writing about other industries and looking at the industry I was now working in and saying, well, what do we need to do in the media industry to change the way we work and change our business models and our sources of revenue and the way that we make money in order to make sure we're successful in the long term. And that ultimately then played a big part in the job that I then came to get at Computer Weekly in 2009.
When did you become editor-in-chief then?
I joined as editor-in-chief in Computer Weekly.
How did that come about? Okay, and how did you adapt to being editor-in-chief? And how was that experience for you?
I think the roots of that move started really in 2008 with the financial crash, to be honest. The publishing company that owned computing, where I was at the time, had spent a number of years buying lots of publications, lots of other publishing companies on sort of leverage buyouts, so lots of very heavily debt-funded buyouts. And then when the crash happened, as a lot of organizations found at that time, organizations that were heavily debt-funded really, really struggled. Banks were calling in loans and all these sort of things. And that company wasn't able to invest in computing at that time as much as it hoped. I got approached then by Computer Weekly. It was an old friend of mine, somebody I'd worked with a few years before, and he asked me to come in and have a chat and said, look, we know we've got a problem here. Computer Weekly was still very print-heavy publication, had a website, but wasn't making a great amount of money from the website. And he sort of said, look, we know we have a challenge here. We have to turn Computer Weekly from, an ailing print publication into a modern digital modern all digital publication, and we're looking for somebody to come in and do that. And it's going to involve some difficult decisions. It's going to involve a lot of change. I told them what my ideas were and what I'd learned about what we needed to do and how we needed to change our business model and the way we operated. And they
Sure.
bought into it, and they supported me in doing that. So I took on what I saw as a challenge of taking what was still a fabulous brand in Computer Weekly within its market, but which had lost its way commercially, perhaps, and to try and turn that round, to try and get that back. Helped to be part of a team that was trying to get that back on a more positive footing for the future, and turn it into a completely digital publication. And here I am, 15 years later, fortunately able to say that we did that, and we've reaped the rewards of that, and the growth that we've had since then has been testimony to a lot of the decisions that were made at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the media, just journalism generally, just went through a significant period of change in the 2010s, didn't it? And I think overseeing that transition to a digital publication must have been quite a big moment, but one I'm sure is reaping the benefits now. Can you just tell the listeners what sort of project or what story that you worked on are you most proud of during your time at Computer Weekly? Because you covered a lot of stories. What stands out for you?
I would have to say the thing that I'm most proud of us doing over that period of time is everything that we've done around the post office scandal.
For sure.
Which obviously has been one of the news stories of the year, following on from the ITV drama at the start of the year that really engaged the public with the sort of outrage that we felt for a very long time. It was Computer Weekly who first exposed the post office scandal back in 2009. Now, I take no credit for that. That was 6 months before I joined, and that initial story had been published.
How did that happen?
That happened really thanks to Alan Bates, the man who has now become famous as the lead campaigner for the sub postmasters who are the victims of the scandal. He's had a TV drama series named after him, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office.
Sure, yeah, it's fantastic. By the way, I've seen it. It's really an eye opener. So did Mr. Bates contact Computer Weekly then, or was it?
Yeah, so you may recall, Computer Weekly featured quite heavily in the first episode of the drama, which we were very pleased about. It was very good of the producers to do that. Alan Bates first got in touch with Computer Weekly 20 years ago in 2004. He wrote a letter to Computer Weekly off the recommendation of a friend who worked in IT, and said, Computer Weekly investigates a lot of these sort of, government IT cock-ups and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And he wrote a letter saying what had happened to him, that a new system had come in, that he suddenly started getting all sorts of accounting errors and he couldn't work out where they came from. And he'd been sacked by the post office from his job. And he was convinced that it was because of the IT. At that time, one of my predecessors who got that letter had to sort of write back to him and say, this sounds really interesting, but you're only one person and we can't build a story about just what one person is saying. I hope you understand, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think he understood. 4 years later, again, sort of the year before I joined, another sub-postmaster victim of the scandal, Lee Castleton, who was also featured as a character in the drama, wrote to Computer Weekly telling a very similar story. People remembered that previous letter from Alan Bates and sort of thought, maybe we've got a story now. So the job was given to a young reporter at the time, Rebecca Thompson, to go out and investigate this. And Rebecca did an amazing job of searching around, and she found a whole bunch of other sub-postmasters, and in the end managed to persuade 7 of them, including Alan was one of those, to go on the record about their experiences. And that was that first story that was published in May of 2009. And the thing that stood out from that story that Rebecca was the first one to be able to show was that everyone, none of those people she talked to knew each other. They all worked in different parts of the country. They all had very, very similar experiences. But every single one of them was told by the post office, you are the only one getting these problems. So, inevitably as a journalist, that sets all sorts of alarm bells ringing. Somebody there is not telling the truth. I came in 6 months later. I think if we're honest, I don't think any of us at that time really anticipated just how big that story would get. But, I could see there was something there, because The post office was saying to us at the time, this is a non-story. There are no systemic bugs in Horizon. There cannot, this cannot be the cause of those people's problems. And that was what they were saying to us, showed a fundamental misunderstanding of how software works. If you've got a systemic flaw in a big piece of software like Horizon, the software that the post office uses, you find out about that very quickly. If software affects lots of people, you find about it very quickly. You can replicate it, and then you can solve it. The software bugs that cause companies problems are the intermittent ones, the ones that are hard to replicate, the ones that don't happen very often, that might only happen to one person because just say they accidentally hit the wrong key at the wrong time, and it causes a behavior in the system that the software doesn't know how to deal with.
Yeah.
So, that just sort of added to the red flags for us that what the post office was saying to us was not right. And basically in that 15 years since then, we have kept plugging. We've written more than 400 stories now on the post office scandal, many of which were just little markers in the sand, showing the progress of what was happening on this. We've done some big stories in that time as well. We've been the first to reveal evidence of some of the bugs that were present in the Horizon system that were causing these sort of accounting losses. And for a lot of that time, there was huge frustration among the team and those of us who were involved with it. We'd be writing these stories and we'd be saying to ourselves, why is this not on the front page of every newspaper? Why is this not leading the news on the BBC? This is such an enormous scandal. And it took that ITV drama at the start of the year to give it that final push to get the general public to understand the story in a way, and to tell that story in such a way that made them share the anger and the outrage that we had for many years in pursuing that. And so now it's amazing to see the profile it's got, how much has happened, all the good things that are happening, to now exonerate the postmasters that have been prosecuted. It's been an incredible thrill as a journalist to have been part of that, both in terms of everything that's happened this year, and to have been part of, exposing the, what is generally regarded now as the most widespread miscarriage of justice in British legal history.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, as sort of my chief reporter, Carl Flinders, who's done most of the work on this. Carl is very much the guy who should take most of the credit in terms of the writing. He said to me once, "This is the sort of story I came into journalism to be involved with," and I think he's absolutely right.
Yeah. So you obviously, would have followed this story closer than most. You yourself and your team. Yeah. Probably a lot closer than most, but I think most of the listeners will be aware of it, certainly. I think a lot of them would have seen the brilliant drama that went out in January. What was the most compelling or shocking finding from your coverage of the whole scandal? What really stood out for you as being wow? What were the wow moments, Bryan?
I mean, there have been so many wow moments over the course of this story, and even recently, with everything that's been going on at the public inquiry. As you and I are recording this, it's the week after Paula Venables, who was the former chief executive of the post office at the time all this cover up was going on. Even with everything that we know, there are still things coming out now that are gobsmacking revelations. But I think the thing that came across to us in the early days was just how broken the culture at the post office was. There's this enormous institution with a huge social value within the UK. Its marketing slogan at the time this was going on was Britain's most trusted brand. And they were. I can remember surveys at the time, brand surveys, post office, most trusted brand in the UK.
I think a lot of people grew up thinking it was the government.
Well, it was absolutely. It used to be. It used to be government.
It did, yeah. But it retained that level of. Do you know what I mean? You just thought it was the people. Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely.
But yeah.
We would hear. Inevitably, as every journalist will tell you, if you find things out that you can't write, people tell you things that you can't evidence, you can't double source. So we would find out things that we couldn't write, a lot of which have come to light since. But I think the thing that shocked us most was the attitude towards the sub-postmasters from the institution. For most of us, for you and I who use our local post office branches, the post office is the sub-postmaster. It is the person in the little rural branch who knows everybody in the community and, knows all the pensioners when, in the days when they used to go in and get their pensions from the post office once a week and all this sort of thing. They are the post office. It became apparent that the institution, the people in the centre of the post office thoroughly distrusted those sub-postmasters. And the culture at the time that the Horizon IT system was rolled out, before Horizon, postmasters kept manual accounts and fed those back up to the post office. The institutional culture towards those sub-postmasters was they're all fiddling the books. They're all trousering a little bit of extra money here and there. We just can't prove it. So when this IT system came in that automated all the accounting processes across all of the post office, and then in the early 2000s, it started throwing up accounting errors and showing that large numbers of these branches were having losses. Instead of the institution thinking, that's weird, why are so many people suddenly having accounting losses? They went, see, we knew it all along. And we knew we were right. They've been fiddling the books all along, and now we can prove it. And everything started from that.
Right.
Everything on this scandal started from that attitude.
It was like confirmation bias, basically.
Total confirmation bias.
They were arriving at an outcome that they kind of wanted to arrive at, and whatever bit of evidence would feed into that narrative was what they fed on.
Yeah.
I suppose. And that makes sense. Do you feel a little bit, Bryan? I don't know. Obviously, from your knowledge of this whole matter, in terms of Fujitsu, of kind of like, it's post office have taken the brunt of the blame for this, and rightly so, depending on based on a lot of the things we've already talked about. But Fujitsu, of course, have taken blame as well, but nowhere near as much. We've not had the CEO of Fujitsu in a public inquiry. I mean, not to the extent that the level of scrutiny that Mrs. Venables has got. Yeah. They were complicit in this. It was their system. At the end of the day, and we all know about the cover-up, but ultimately it was their system. They walked away a bit scot-free from all this.
I think for a lot of time they did. I think it's only since the TV drama came out that really the scrutiny on Fujitsu has been what it should have been, and the sort of public shaming of them for their role in this. In one respect, I have a certain amount of sympathy for Fujitsu in that when Horizon was being rolled out in that period in the early 2000s, we talked earlier about what an exciting time the early 2000s were in terms of the dot-com boom and technology coming out. It was also a period of time when the public sector and major public services were being automated for the very first time. It was a time. It was a big initiative from Tony Blair as Prime Minister. He used the phrase e-government at the time, and put a lot of money into starting to automate public services. And during that period of time, there were a lot of big government IT cock-ups. I wrote about a lot of them. I broke some of them when I was a reporter. Lots of big government IT systems had major problems. It's not as if Fujitsu was the only big tech company that was developing large-scale, complex IT systems for the public sector that were having tech problems. I think the failing for me of Fujitsu was once they became aware of what the post office was doing, that it was prosecuting people based upon accounting losses that Horizon was showing up. They knew about the bugs. They've admitted they knew there were bugs. They knew that the bugs were there. They hid behind the post office. They never at any stage did they come out and either go to the post office forcefully and say, you cannot do this. This could be because of bugs in the system. Nor did they go publicly and say, we've got to be honest here. We think what the post office here is doing is wrong. So they became complicit in what the post office was doing. The post office is to blame, 100%. This came from the post office making bad decisions and doubling down on those decisions, lying about what they were doing, and then trying to cover up the lie.
And hoping it'll go away, I think was the big one, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely, yeah. Very, very much so. Fujitsu is most complicit because it went along with the cover-up.
Yeah, sure. This episode was brought to you by Be Digital. BeDigital support leadership teams to optimize cost and get more out of technology investments. BeDigital and the team have unrivaled expertise with technology license management and data remediation and are therefore perfectly positioned to help prepare organizations for AI technology capability. And on the last point, BeDigital have just developed a cutting-edge AI readiness assessment, which provides tech leaders with a platform they need to make well-informed decisions about AI adoption strategy in 2024 and beyond. Go to bedigitaluk.com to find out more and get in touch. So let's maybe pivot in towards investigative journalism then, Bryan. Okay, so that of Computer Weekly. I know you've done quite a lot of this type of thing over the years. Well, what's your thoughts on investigative journalism? What part does it play in holding powerful institutions like Post Office accountable? Because the tech industry is becoming ubiquitous. Everything is the tech industry now. It wasn't before. So, what do you think about investigative journalism holding institutions to account on things? And is that something you see yourself doing more of in the future?
I mean, to me, I'm a journalist, so I would say this, but to me, investigative journalism is one of the fundamental bedrocks of an open democratic society. You need to have journalists who are willing to ask the difficult questions, to put people in power under scrutiny, and to uncover the information that people in power don't want the rest of us to know about. It's hard. It takes a lot of work. It takes a long time. Yeah. The big risk to it is
you've got to be patient, haven't you? I suppose
you've got to be patient. 15 years, we've been working on this particular story with the Post Office. It's also very difficult to justify commercially because of the time it takes, because of the effort that has to go into it. And sadly, all across the media, we've seen a decline in investigative journalism because as the business model of the media industry has changed, as advertising has gone elsewhere, as a lot of those traditional sources of revenue for the media industry have declined in the digital era, a lot of publications in a lot of different areas of the media have decided they can't afford to do investigative journalism anymore for that cost, which is a terrible shame. Now, from our perspective, in technology terms, the world runs on technology now. The government runs on technology. Every major business runs on technology. Our lives run on technology. Data about us, our personal information, the way we live our lives, the websites we go to, the places we visit, the things we do, all that data is being funneled by technology back to big corporations and back to governments. There's never, to my mind, been a time when investigative journalism around technology and how technology is being used has been more important.
Well said. Yeah, I agree.
These days, a lot of investigative journalism is going to be about finding information that's in computers, that's about computers, that's being gathered by computers. And that's hard. It needs a decent understanding of technology and how it works. And it means knowing the people who understand these things in technology and having them in your contact book and being able to ring people up and say, look, I've just found this out. Does this check out? Does this make sense to you? I see what we do as in investigative journalism from a technology basis as getting increasingly important. It's only to get more and more important. If somebody asked me to retrospectively write a profit and loss for the work that we've done on the Post Office scandal over 15 years, I would probably come out at the end of it and show you a whopping loss. But in terms of the impact that journalism has had, both generally to the Post Office victims and the Post Office itself, and yes, in terms of the positive impact it's had, particularly this year on our brand and brand awareness around Computer Weekly, has been enormous, and it's almost impossible to put a financial, commercial figure onto that.
How do you decide and choose which stories to prioritize? The time of your team is precious and it's a finite resource. How do you decide which ones that you need to spend time and effort, putting their energy into. So how do you have a gut feeling? Do you have a decision framework? How do you arrive at that decision, Bryan?
That's a really good question, because I would say our biggest challenge on a day-to-day basis is prioritization. It's deciding what we don't write about as much as is a harder decision than what we do write about. I often say to my boss, and he just raises an eyebrow when I say it, if he doubled the size of my team overnight, I would still keep everybody busy. There is so much that we could be writing about in the tech world these days.
Yeah.
So the way that we go about prioritizing it, there isn't any sort of formal process or anything like that. So there is an element of experience and gut feel to it. But I always say to all of my journalists, all the reporters, you should be, if I turn to you at any time and say to you, what are the 10 biggest issues in your reporting area, your beat as we call it, what are the 10 biggest issues in your beat at the moment? You should be able to reel off the 10 biggest issues, or whatever the number is, 6 biggest, 20 biggest, whatever it is in terms of what they're writing about. And you should be able to say to me, well, this is why it's a big issue. This is where it's going next. This is what we've written about it most recently. This is why I think this is going to be a bigger issue into the future. And so that's the sort of framework that we start from. Really, is when a story comes in, if one of my reporters sees this is relevant to this big theme. So let's take, for example, security. The most read topic on Computer Weekly is security. Not surprisingly, it's the single biggest issue for people working in IT is cybersecurity. If I said to Alex, who's my security editor, give me some of the big issues at the moment, probably one of the first things he would say would be ransomware. Ransomware is a massive problem. It's been the biggest, the fastest growing form of cybersecurity in recent years. It's now being generally identified as one of the biggest risk factors that even at a government level people are talking about. How do we address that? So if we're assessing a number of different stories, and one of those stories is a possible ransomware attack on somebody or a new form of ransomware or something like that, we're going to jump straight on that one, because we know ransomware is a really big issue that is very relevant for our audience, and is only going to continue getting to be a bigger issue. Having said that, we still have to be mindful that once upon a time, we didn't think ransomware was a big issue and nobody really knew what it was. So we've also still got to be keeping an eye on what's happening around the edges, what's coming onto the radar that might become a big issue in the future. And that really comes down to a judgment call between conversations between myself and the people on my team about, I think this is going to be really big for these reasons. And I think we should put some resource and some effort into writing about this, because it's something we think in a while has become bigger. And there are any number of examples I could say to you over the years where we've seen something at a very early stage that nobody else is really writing about, and we've gone out and we've written about it and sort of taken a bit of a lead on it, if you like. That has then subsequently become a huge issue that everybody else is writing about as well.
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes sense. Just in terms of emerging trends, and obviously you've got a unique sort of perspective on the UK tech industry. What are you most excited about, and also what are you most concerned about in terms of emerging trends in the tech sector in the UK right now?
I get asked this question a lot about, what's the most exciting thing in tech at the moment? And in all honesty, I find it a slightly difficult question to answer. Maybe it's just because I've been around the sector for too long. Perhaps I'm just, having been a journalist for 25 years now, perhaps I'm just getting a little bit too cynical. The thing that's always excited me the most about technology hasn't changed, in that it's the way that technology makes our lives better, the way it makes our work, the way we work, the way we live, the way we communicate with each other better. And anything that supports that is a technology that excites me. But of course, most technologies these days do that in one reason or another. One of the privileges of my job is I get to talk to lots of people who aren't necessarily in the public profile, academics and researchers and people like that, about what they think's going on in the world. And I get to sort of take bits of that and think, that makes sense, and that makes sense, and sort of synthesize it all together. And, to me, what's happening in the tech sector at the moment at that sort of big macro contextual level has no different from what has happened for 200 years in terms of technological innovation generally. People get very excited about the idea of invention. There's actually, to me, there's very little invention going on in the tech sector at the moment. But there's a huge amount of innovation. To me, an invention is something that's completely new that will enable you to do something you've never been able to do before. Innovation is about using existing technologies to do things better, faster, cheaper. Let's go back a couple hundred years, say, to the Industrial Revolution. Arguably, the technology that was the catalyst for the Industrial Revolution was the steam engine. It wasn't the case that the steam engine was invented and then the Industrial Revolution happened. The steam engine had been invented.
It was invented in my hometown of Merthyr Tydfil.
There we go. There we go. Absolutely.
By Richard Trevithick.
Absolutely, that's right. Richard Trevithick. But that came. The very first steam engine was like over 100 years before the Industrial Revolution is generally considered to have started. The kickstarter of the Industrial Revolution was, if I remember rightly, if I get the text right, was when James Watt built a steam engine that was small enough and easy enough to produce and cheap enough to produce that it was able to go mass market. It basically commoditized the steam engine. And once it commoditized the steam engine, there was this enormous outburst of innovation, of people using the steam engine to do all sorts of things, build trains, build factories, find ways to pull coal out of the ground. And it's those innovations is what we now call the Industrial Revolution. You can look at almost any major technological innovation in the last 200 years, and you've got the same story. Look at the car, for example. The internal combustion engine was the invention that eventually led to the transport revolution that the car brought about. But that was invented, was it by Messrs. Daimler and Benz, wasn't it, in the late 19th century? But it wasn't until Henry Ford commoditized the production of cars and made them cheap enough to produce at a high volume for the mass market, that suddenly that was the catalyst for all the innovation and road building and transport innovation that we've seen since. And we're going through exactly that in the technology sector, and we've been going through that for 50 plus years. The personal computer in the 80s was the time that we commoditized the ability for us as individuals to be able to use computers. Before that, it was big mainframes where you needed really specialist skills, and they were hugely expensive. The personal computer commoditized the ability to use computers. For us, ended up with one on every desk, eventually in every home. That was the catalyst for a huge amount of innovation with all the PC applications, spreadsheets, word processors, email, all this sort of things.
Yeah,
in the 90s, the internet had been around for 30 years, but it reached a point where where it became commoditized. It was cheap enough, ubiquitous enough, available enough for everybody to use it. That was the catalyst for an enormous amount of innovation. The World Wide Web was the biggest of those innovations. Websites, e-commerce, all of that innovation that came from that. Then you had the smartphone and a commoditizing again of that mobile technology. Huge burst of innovation out of it. Apps, social media, all these sort of things.
Absolutely, yeah.
Cloud, commoditization of large scale computing power and storage, making that cheap, affordable, and highly accessible. Where we are in technology and the sort of digital revolution, if you like, at the moment, it's not that, I would argue, it's not that we have a huge pace of invention. It's not like there's so many new technologies coming out. It's just that we are reaching the point of commoditization in so many different areas of technology now that is causing so much innovation in all areas of our lives, personal life, working life, everything. That technology is changing more aspects of our lives at the same time than it ever has before. So when I look at new technologies as they're coming through, that's the frame of reference, if you like, that I'm coming from. So most people, if you ask most people today, what do you think is the most exciting technology around? They probably say AI.
Yeah, of course.
But I think AI to me is just another really good example of exactly that same process. Generative AI at the moment, ChatGPT and all this. The core technologies at the heart of ChatGPT and generative AI is neural networking, which has been around since the 60s. Some of the principles have been around since the 50s. The reason we're talking about this now is because we've got to a point, because of mobile phones, because of the ubiquity of data, because of cloud, because of all the other commoditization that's come before this point, that neural networking and the technologies around it can now be commoditized. They can now be done at such a large scale, at an affordable cost, that makes it reasonable for all of us to be able to use it. It gives us the ability to be able to go into whichever generative AI you like and say, give me a picture of a bunch of penguins in suits sitting in the Houses of Parliament, and for and to generate that in seconds, and to get that wow moment, is wow, that's incredible. This almost looks so real. To be able to have these conversations with ChatGPT and all these sort of things, which for somebody who's coming to this cold, blows your mind. It really does.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
So for me, what's exciting about technology at the moment is the fact that so many different areas of the technology sector are reaching this point of commoditization and are therefore having this enormous surge of innovation as a result of more and more of these technologies becoming affordable and easy to produce and easily accessible. And I still think we're very much in the early days of the sort of innovations that's going to lead to.
Just to add a thought on that, I think it's a really good point that the life cycle always remains the same. You get the invention, and then you get the manifestation of that invention to a point where it becomes commoditized and it becomes ubiquitous, but it takes a while. Obviously, the steam engine took ages. Even the internet was invented in the 70s or 80s. Didn't really hit the business world until the late 90s, really, isn't it? And then obviously the man on the street, even later. It wasn't really till the iPhone, was it? I don't suppose. But what is changing, I think, and absolutely you're right. There's so many of these things going on now. There's so many of these inventions, and then the manifestation of the invention. But what I think is changing is the speed of the life cycle from invention to commoditization. It seems to be just, there's so many of them going on, and they just happening quicker. It still takes time, and I absolutely agree on that one. It's not overnight these things happen. AI, I think, is an enormous step. Generative AI, is an enormous step forward. I just think everyone's confused about how it's useful for them right now, apart from being able to write a quick tweet or summarize a book you haven't got time to read or whatever. It's great for that. But in terms of real, actionable, productive output, I don't think we've quite nailed how it works for us yet, at least, or most people haven't anyway. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, we're about 18 months or so now after that release of ChatGPT that really engaged the world, that really got people excited about this. Even at this stage, businesses are still only tentatively starting to use the technology. They're still checking it out. They're still making sure that it's viable for them. And there are some fantastic examples of businesses that are using ChatGPT type technology, generative AI technology, but they're mostly using it for internally. They're using it in very carefully controlled environments where they can, maintain their confidence that the results they're getting out of it are viable and is providing them with information that genuinely helps their business. And that will accelerate, of course. That will accelerate. But there is that time gap between the excitement and then people working out, well, how can I actually use this?
Yeah, sure.
What are the actual applications of this? And then it's suddenly starting to pop up everywhere.
It'll never become lightning quick because I just don't think people are there. I mean, do you know what I mean? It's like people are the thing that slows it down now, not the invention. The invention and the manifestation and then the commoditization, I think, will never be instant because people take a long time to adopt, don't they? You know what I mean? So,
and that's a really good point because that's the one thing I think the technology sector still is not really not very good at. We can pump out these new technologies all the time, but as human beings, we will only ever have a certain capacity to absorb the change in our lives that these technologies bring along. There is and we're getting better at it. We're getting faster at it. If you were to try and plot this on a graph, you would find you'd get bursts of innovation in technology, and then you'll get a slowdown, and then you'll get a burst of innovation, and then you'll get a slowdown. And that slowdown happens because we as a society reach a point where it's like, it's too much. is too much. It's happening. Change is happening too quickly.
Sure.
We need to slow down, assimilate what we've got, and then we can move on again.
Absolutely. I feel we're quite close to that right now.
Yes, I agree. The other question you asked me earlier as well, what excites you, was sort of what concerns you. And that relates into this as well in a way, because I think the thing that worries me most about in the technology world is we still haven't learned the lessons fully of the unforeseen consequences of technology. As technology is becoming more ubiquitous, as it's becoming used in more and more areas of our lives, yes, it's bringing enormous benefits, but every technology is going to have a downside to it as well. For every great new thing you can do, there's going to be a negative side to it. Who would have ever, when we were all starting to get excited about social media back in 2008, 2009, 2010, whatever, when Facebook was suddenly becoming ubiquitous, who would ever have imagined that a few years after that, people would be blaming Facebook for influencing general elections in major Western democracies? You just wouldn't have been able to comprehend that this tool you were using to share photos with your auntie in Australia,
I know,
would become this tool for authoritarian governments to try and undermine elections in other parts of the world. You wouldn't have been able to make that leap.
Absolutely.
But we're too slowly learning that lesson that these great technologies have unforeseen consequences, and we need to be better prepared and think more about what their unforeseen consequences are. And this is one of the things around AI that I hope is encouraging. There has been a ridiculous amount of hype. We've all heard some of the daft, AI is going to take over the world. AI is going to destroy the world.
Skynet is playing out.
Skynet is on the way. The world. All this sort of thing. All of that's bullshit, frankly. It's people trying to sell technology, but there's a kernel of truth in it. In that, AI is a technology. We don't know what the unforeseen consequences of AI are going to be, and I think it is a good thing that we are having that conversation at this very early stage of AI. I still remain to be convinced that conversation is going to go as far as it needs to go, because there are vested interests who don't really want to have that conversation, because ultimately it might restrict the way AI is going to be used. But I think those sort of conversations about the potential unforeseen consequences, the ethics, the safety of new technologies, I think are hugely important. And if there's one thing I would like to change in the tech sector more than any other at the moment, it would be to embed those conversations right at the very heart of everything we do.
I think the people want to know, okay, you compile very successful UK Tech 50, most influential women in tech. How do you go about choosing who gets on that list and where they are placed in those lists?
We've been doing it for a long time now, so we've sort of got the process down quite well now. We pulled together a judging panel of sort of representatives from various different parts of the tech sector, who bring their perspectives on what's important, what's influence in the tech sector means, and we place a lot of faith in those judges' experience and contacts and knowledge. We engage with our audience, with our readers, asking them to nominate people. The ultimate purpose of UK Tech 50 and of the most influential women is to recognise role models, to change perceptions of the tech sector. That it's not just all about techies and people with beards and sandals in base rooms writing code and never seeing daylight. That people in technology are changing our lives for the better.
Absolutely.
We're in a privileged position at Computer Weekly as we know a lot of these people, but we don't know all of them. So we rely a lot on our readers to nominate people that they consider to be influential for them. Yeah. And then we go through we go through a judging process where the judges assess all the people who are nominated, come out and then come out with the list. We do a reader vote on the short list as well. And then we come out with these finalists. And the focus of them, I often get contacted afterwards by people saying, I didn't make the list. Well, I'm a bit disappointed. Can you tell me why? And I can't really tell them why, because we never, ever make a conscious decision not to put somebody in the top 50. We make conscious decisions about the reasons why we put people into the top 50. But nobody who doesn't make the top 50 is there because anybody ever said, I don't think they should be there. They're not good enough. or they've not done enough. It's about, looking at what people have done and saying, these people have done something really, 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 really special this year. And it's hard. We're going through. We've just recently been through the first phase of the judging for the UK Tech 50, the most influential people in technology. And there are loads of people who didn't make the final 50 that I know really well, and I know what an incredible job they're doing. And I would love to see them in the top 50, but it's not my top 50. It's a top 50 by judges from, all across from lots of different perspectives, all across the sector.
It's not a personal opinion. It's a consensus-based opinion based on a structure you've developed for this type of thing, which I'm sure is probably very impartial and, is based on facts, not subjective.
Absolutely. We try as much to make it that as we can. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, good answer. Well, thanks for clearing that up. So, Bryan, I know you've got a long way to go in your career, but looking back now in your armchair with your smoking jacket and your cigar, looking back on your career, if you were to sort of talk to your 21-year-old self, maybe the guy who first left university and got into the sort of media world, maybe around that time of your life, what would you say to that guy? What career advice would you give to that person, knowing what you know now?
I think two things come to mind. One, I would say, don't be afraid to follow your instincts. Don't be afraid to follow your gut. Don't be worried that some of your decisions will take you down a dead end in your career, because with the right attitude and the right approach, you can back out of those dead ends and you can change direction. I've had the experience now of doing that. I think if I'd known that when I was 21, I'd have been better at it. I might have taken more risks without being quite so worried about what the outcome of those risks would be. So I think on one level, it's very much the thing, don't be afraid to follow your instinct. And I think the other thing I'd say, thinking back to how I was at 21 and how I was thinking about technology at that time, was I would say to my 21-year-old self, don't worry, one day technology is going to be cool. Trust me, technology is going to be cool. When I was at university and I was going to parties and meeting people and trying to meet girls and make friends and all that sort of thing, it's like university. You eventually get around to the conversation. You'll chat with somebody. You'll get around to. You eventually say, "Well, what are you studying?" And they would say what they were doing, and I would say, I'm doing computer studies. And they'd be like, oh, okay.
Zeros and ones.
Yeah. For a lot of my early years working in the technology sector, it was similar. As I was getting older and meeting people and going to dinner parties and all this sort of thing, as you do in your 20s and 30s, it was that sort of thing. You'd get chatting with somebody and they say, "Oh, what do you do?" And I say, "Oh, well, I work in IT," because that's what everybody called it at the time. I work in IT, and they're like, "Oh, okay." And there was just this constant process of having to get over the people's disappointment when you said to them you work in IT. These days, and for only a few years now, I was going to say, when I got into journalism initially, it was, I'm a journalist, and people, "Oh, really? That's really interesting. Tell me more. What do you write about?" And say, "Well, I work for a tech magazine." Oh, okay. We've got the point now where I have those conversations with people now, and I say, I write about technology, and people go, "Oh, wow, that's really interesting. That must be so much fun, isn't it? Exciting. What's going on in the technology world? So much, isn't it? Incredible."
I bet there's probably to the contrary there, but they probably expect you to be an expert on absolutely everything.
Absolutely,
now.
yeah, of course, yeah. Oh, yeah.
You obviously, you're a cyber expert, you're an AI expert, you're a ubiquitous expertise of everything, basically.
Oh, yeah, I think probably everybody who works in tech who meets somebody who's not in tech at some point will get asked the question, "So, which is the best iPhone to buy?" I've got no idea.
Or how do I fix my laptop?
How do I fix how do I fix my printer? At least people don't print so often these days, so I don't get the how do you fix your printer question quite so often.
Brilliant. So let's end on this one, Bryan. So I always ask the guest to finish off. Have you been inspired by a book recently? Or it doesn't have to be a book if you're not much of a reader. It could be a story, an anecdote. But what piece of content have you been inspired by recently that you could recommend to the listeners?
That's really interesting. That's such an interesting question. And such a difficult one to try and pick one. I'm going to pick a book that I came across in a reader, nothing to do with technology. As a hobby, I like writing fiction as purely as a hobby, creative writing. A little while back, I did a an MA, a master's degree part-time master's degree in creative writing as a hobby. Great fun. Loved it. Got so much out of it. As part of that, I came across a book called Into the Woods by a chap called John York. He's a screenwriter. He used to be like a senior screenwriter at the BBC and at Channel 4. And he's basically written a book about, essentially, it's how to tell stories. It's about how to structure it. How stories work. Why is storytelling important, and how do stories work? Now, I read it initially from the perspective of, if you want to write a book or a short story or something like that, what could I learn from this to structure those stories and make my storytelling better? And it's become a little bit of this book has become a little bit of a Bible for me on this. But I've also realised that a lot of the principles of it around storytelling apply to so much more of your life. It applies to my job. It applies to the way we communicate. It applies to the way that I, as a journalist, try to tell stories to people. And I think this subject of storytelling and understanding storytelling is so hugely important.
Yeah,
absolutely. In a world where there is so much technology, where technology is confusing, where it's changing our lives so much and will continue to change our lives for many years to come. The ability to be able to communicate with somebody else in a way that they will understand and empathize and appreciate what it means for them, which is what storytelling is all about, is hugely important. So, if anybody who's listening to this is interested in creative writing, is interested in storytelling, I would absolutely recommend them go and read the book Into the Woods by John York.
Fantastic answer. I will make sure that goes into the show notes. Okay. Look, storytelling is a fundamental, primal. It's a fundamental part of the human experience, isn't it? And at a fundamental level, at least. And it's a skill that it sounds quite easy to say it, but I think people who are good storytellers, especially when you throw in complex things like the tech sector, but if you can create stories out of that are compelling, then I think that's how you get across important facts or what, you get information across so much easier. If you chuck facts at me, I'm not going to listen. If you tell me a story, I'm inevitably going to listen. Everyone loves a story. So I think that's fantastic. That's a very, very important skill, especially in your line of work.
The tech sector historically and largely to this day is not very good at storytelling. The tech sector loves features and functions and whizzy new things and bits and bytes and look at this exciting new thing my software can do, that my app can do, all that sort of thing. It's still a little bit obsessed with features and functions. And I think the tech sector generally needs to get a lot better at storytelling. Really does.
Yeah, I think it's due probably to the sort of short attention span that we've all got these days due to social media and things like that. You kind of want immediate impact in your face, and a lot of people are not patient enough to read on, to listen to a story. And I think that's something that we all need to work on, because you're missing out. Stories are, you've got to be patient. I mean, you've got stories are never communicated in 120 characters.
Very rarely.
Stories are, you read beyond that. But look, Bryan, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Another nugget of wisdom there, and amongst many others. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast, the 100th episode. So thank you for being a part of this milestone for us. I have to say, the most recommended book, I've asked pretty much every guest this question, the most recommended book is actually Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, which is also a non-tech related book. Which, so that's a really popular one as well amongst the guests. So, but yeah, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders Podcast, Bryan.
My pleasure. Really, I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so.
Wow, what an episode to celebrate our 100th release. I can't believe we've been through this process 100 times. It's crazy. But there are loads of revelations to focus on here. Bryan was very candid. I mean, it was a brilliant interview. Where do I start? I think the one I want to draw attention to, because what really struck me most, it's a bit of an intangible, but Bryan was obviously talking about what seemingly what appeared to be an orchestrated tactic of repeatedly telling postmasters, you are the only one, almost perpetuating the idea that their individual struggles were isolated incidents. It was Mr. Bates and the campaigners who obviously put in the hard yards on this, but I have to say, Computer Weekly, their journalistic integrity and their persistence really did support and help uncover this pattern that turned what could be a mere story into an institutional scandal. And obviously, Bryan's description and Bryan talking about how this played out from the Computer Weekly's perspective, I thought was fascinating. It was just a really interesting part. But there was so much to draw attention to here. So reflecting on our journey to 100 episodes over the last 4.5 years, it feels like both a blur and also a monumental leap from recording our first episode on a phone back in 2019 right through to where we are now. Looking back, we've evolved so much. We've become an established podcast, which is reflected in the amount of inbound interest we get from PR companies and people wanting to come on as guests. Ultimately, our goal is to give real people a platform to share their story unfiltered. Whilst we invariably don't have the marketing budget and the production budget of the larger podcast productions, our goal has always been very simple. It's to share authentic stories that inspire people. And hopefully, we've managed to do that. We have so much more fantastic content to come your way, including some of the UK's and international top CTOs, CIOs, and other tech leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, journalists, and those with a great story to tell in relation to leadership and technology and this incredible sector that we're all involved in. Thank you so much for your support. I look forward to delivering more great content to you in the years to come. Thank you so much for your support. Please share and try to amplify the message. We're always looking for new listeners and we're hoping to spread our reach as wide as we possibly can. I look forward to delivering more great content to you in the years to come.